read this book before, whereas when I did Molière, I had read all the plays before. So that's exciting. And I'm enjoying it at the same time. 18 minutes late. So yeah, Notre-Dame de Paris. I actually visited the actual Notre-Dame de Paris a few weeks ago. Well, a few months ago now. Basically, like 2 weeks before the virus stuff happened. Looks less great. It's fire and everything. But it was kind of cool to be there and be like, okay, I know I have to read this book. It is on one of my exams. And really, what I'm really loving about this book so far is all of the references to theater, especially because I work on 16th century justice and like trials. And in the 15th century, when the story takes place, there were plays that were farces, so they were satires, basically, put on by law students. And the Society of Law Students were known as the Bazoches. So you'll see the Bazoches mentioned in this book a few times. And actually, let me see if I can show you the book. 1 moment. Okay, there we go. So here is one that I actually just read recently, which would be considered a Bazoche play. What the Bazoche was, again, like I said, there were these students of law who would put on these plays. They were really entertaining because they would be making fun of lawyers and other people. But it was also what our character actually based off of the historical figure of Pierre Gringoire. Gringoire wrote morality plays as well as like farces, right? And we read one of them in a class. Oh, this connection is unstable, it says. I'll wait till it reconnects. It says it's still weak. Okay, hopefully it's fine now. Let me know if you're unable to hear me or something is going on. But yes, so Pierre Gringoire, our character here, is based off of an actual historical figure named Pierre Gringoire, who would make plays, both morality plays, which usually include allegorical characters, just as here Gringoire is putting on a play in the Palace of Justice, and what was it? Nobility. There's I need to go find. I wrote it down here. Where are morality characters here? I think it's like nobility, and there's like wealth and economy, and basically all of these like typological characters are used as like a social commentary. But what Gringoire is most famous for are his farces during the Feast of Fools, word of Lent. And this was a time when people would actually use humor and this kind of carnivalesque entertainment, which is like throwing everything on its head, to call out abuses in the papacy, in the parliament, etc. This was the one time you were kind of allowed to make fun of the king. And so this is what we see here, is that, Gringoire is putting on a very serious, frankly, quite boring play. And suddenly, because, first everyone wants to hear the play, then the cardinal arrives with his, Flemish retinue, and trying to put on, and then the cobbler who is there, he proposes, connection's unstable. He proposes a competition where everybody has to make faces, and whoever looks the ugliest is crowned the Pope, right? And of course, unfortunately, Quasimodo is crowned. And so there's a lot going on here, okay? And what I really like about this book is that clearly Victor Hugo has done a lot of research. So I wanted to point out a few things that maybe because you might not have a background in medieval history or literature or whatever, you might not have noticed. And I wanted to pull those out because they might make the story just a little bit more interesting. I really hope my signal is okay. Really, do let me know if the signal is not good, because I can't. So, first thing to note, there is this very interesting commentary about time. And, well, that's not it. Let's see. Tebow. The character of Tebow is, there are names in the story, like Tebow, that in the Middle Ages would be associated with a particular kind of person. So a character like Tebow in like farces would be kind of ridiculed. And let me see. Let's see. It doesn't explain it, but Tebow would be like a name that you would find a lot in medieval satires. Or you would find, like, for example, there would be the character named Margot, and Margot would be like the prostitute. So there's kind of names like that in the story that have multiple senses. Like, they're not just, names of characters, but like within the world of medieval theater, these characters would say is that there's a play within a play. You have the play that Pierre Gringoire is putting on, and then you have the play that Victor Hugo is putting on for us. People are just not interested in Gringoire's play that he's putting on, because what is actually just going on in the Palace of Justice is just way more interesting. The cardinal arriving, and there's like a beggar that's there, and a cobbler, alongside all of these really wealthy, powerful people. That in itself is a really interesting social commentary. Perhaps even more interesting than the morality play that Gringoire is trying to put on. Mentioned the Bazoche, and the Bazoche will probably appear several times. There's a lot of anti-clericalism, which, remember, this is just like probably like 50 years before the Protestant Reformation. Well, actually less than that. Like, what year is this supposed to have taken place? 1483. So this is like 30 years before the Protestant Reformation. So there's going to be a lot of anti-clericalism, and that becomes a part of the humors, like the humor during the carnival, right? The Feast of Carnival. Anything else that I picked up on? There's also, I'm pretty sure with the characters of Jean Le Cornu, there's some of these characters that really remind me of some other authors. So I want to recommend a few other authors of the 15th century, kind of are in that same style, that of humor, of like social commentary, but like as satire. There is François Villon. I don't know how to share it. I will like basically make a comment here, and then you guys can check it out later. But some other authors. Let's see, 15th century authors. Is François Villon. Particularly his Testament, which again uses like law as like the structure for his humor. And then of course there's Maître Padla. There you go. These are authors that if you can read French, you should consider finding. I don't know if English translations are available. I think there are, and it could be really interesting to read if you want further information about the Feast of Fools and the idea of the kind of the anti-clerical humor of the day. Give some context. So yeah, enough with Gringoire. So yeah, I love. I just love the clash of classes at the Palace of Justice, and how, you know, as soon as like the you know, like someone from the justice system or someone from like the church comes in, everyone is like insulting him, and it's just so much like liberty to just say whatever you want. And I think that Hugo does a good job at like recreating that. So yeah, I don't want to like. I feel like I've been speaking just, you know. So let me know what jumped out at you in this passage. Like, what were the parts that you liked? Were there any characters that you found interesting? Any questions that you had? Put them in the chat here so I can like know what it is that you want to talk about with this part. Mm-hmm. There's this one part where I think it was André Mounier who basically says, he's like, oh, these university students, they're so inappropriate for insulting a bourgeois. And I've already mentioned what a bourgeois is when we talked about Molière. He's like, in my time, we would have like whipped them. It's like, oh, in my day, you know, it's like, I love reading that, you know, in my day, things were so much better. People were always so respectful. There's a lot going on here. I mean, let me show you the footnotes of my edition. Can you tell? This is all footnotes. And then this is all footnotes. So, I mean, this is like, there's a lot of information that we can pull out here. There's a lot of research that Hugo did in writing this book. I have to also admit that when we are introduced to Quasimodo, I can't not think about the Disney character. Like, in my head, he looks like the Disney character. It's really unfortunate because it's like Disney has informed my reading of this book. Interesting, though, that Quasimodo is deaf here. It would make sense as he's ringing bells the whole time. I don't recall he's deaf in the movie. But he's basically been abused by the archdeacon who is in charge of the cathedral. Now, we're not in the cathedral yet. We're still in the Palace of Justice. But I find that interesting because his brother is like one of those more radical characters who's like ridiculing all the people in power. But then like we know that his brother is the archdeacon, and that it's the archdeacon's, like, Quasimodo works for the archdeacon as the bell ringer. So I thought it interesting. Anything else? Let's see. I'm gonna keep. So Tebow. Ridiculous name. Honestly, the equivalent of some of these names like Tebow and Margot, and there's a few other names that come up here, would be kind of like in the social media world when we're talking about like Karen and Becky and Chad and like stuff like that. They're basically type characters, and they're associated with a particular personality. So that's kind of like what Hugo does, is he finds these characters that in the medieval imagination were associated with particular traits. So I'm trying to remember who Tebow was in this book. Oh, yeah. They talk to this guy. Oh, he's the rector. That's right. The rector's name is Tebow, and they're making fun of Tebow, and they're like, "Oh, where are you coming from?" And they say il trotte sur sa. I love this line. Comme il trotte sur sa mule, elle a les oreilles moins longues que lui. Look at him riding on his mule. She, the mule, has ears that are shorter than his ears. Let's see. And they just keep making fun of Tebow. So, yep. And of course, there is the threat of the printing press. The printing press has democratized more communication. It has allowed for, people to make more widely available just polemical texts. This will, of course, be very important in the 16th century with the Reformation. Don't know what else to talk about, because, I'm hoping that some of you read it and you can let me know what you think. So Tebow is a character in Maître Patelin, which I mentioned. So actually, you know what I'll do? Oh yeah, okay. I've not seen the Disney movie. Well, then you're in luck. But the black and white 1939 film with Charles Loughton. I did actually rewrites the entire story. Like, you should never expect Disney to get anything correct, because it's a complete retelling of the story. I do remember enjoying the Disney movie, so I'm not here to knock it. It's simply that if you come in with the Disney expectations, you might be very disappointed. But I've never heard of that. And let's see. Scene of the Classes was played out on TV in 1997 when Princess Diana died. Crowds became angry toward the monarchy, but it just took the queen to show before the crowds, and they displayed deference. Oh, wow. Yes. Okay. That is so... Crowds became angry towards the monarchy, but it just took the queen to show. Right. That's so interesting. So, like, there is the sense of, like... Yeah, there's definitely parallels. I mean, I think the parts that I found the most relatable to from what my experience has been when they're like making fun of like the judge and the rector and like basically any of the authority figures. But also, yeah, we haven't really seen anybody here who has changed sides yet, who like initially is like making fun of some leader and then suddenly like changing their narrative because it's, it benefits them. I don't think we've seen that yet, but I am fascinated with Jean Frollo because his brother, again, is the archdeacon. He's like the bad guy in our story. Again, what I think he's the bad guy based on Disney. Let's see. There's a lot of like history that is being suggested. And one of the downsides of being a literature student and not a historian is that I have to do the history work on my own because we don't learn the history. So, and it's complicated. There are all these kings and it's a mess. So, Maybe you can follow along better, but I always find that to be the most challenging part. Quasimodo. Let me remember what Quasimodo is. It's in the church calendar, and I always forget what it is. Okay, the first disambiguation. Quasimodo is a fictional character. Okay, we know that. Quasimodo, let's put in religion, because it is a day on the religious calendar, and I forget what it is. Quasimodo. Let's see what it says here. It's a feast. It is the first Sunday after Easter. That is what Quasimodo Sunday is. That is good to know, because I think that's significant that our character's name is Quasimodo. And actually, Quasimodo is like the first words of 1 Peter 2:2. That's where it comes from. Quasimodo geniti infantes. So like the means of, like, just like, basically. It comes from a line that says, just like newborn children desire ardently pure spiritual milk. Trying to translate it from the French here. This feast was instituted so that pilgrims coming from afar and arriving in Rome late for what is bad for good reason, basically, after the feast of Easter, could participate in the Mass in the same way, so in Latin, Quasimodo, in the same way as the Mass of Easter. And so, but these pilgrims who were still able to participate in Mass, just as if they were participating in an Easter Mass, they could not, however, receive a plenary indulgence, which is like, indulgence is like remission from the punishment of sin. That remission of the full remission of the punishment of sin, they were not able to receive that. But these pilgrims could still participate in the Easter season, even if they had missed Easter Mass, which at that time was like unacceptable. So that's Quasimodo. I wonder if there is a significance for this, the name of Quasimodo, why he's named that. I'm sure that there is a significance here, but I don't know. Did I note anything else? There was a really interesting commentary about the Palace of Justice in the 19th century when Victor Hugo wrote this book. The Palace of Justice had been burned, torn down, rebuilt in certain parts. And he talks about how, like, so much of history happened in the Palace of Justice, and yet there was no trace of it left by the time, in the 19th century. Like, I think it was already in the 17th century when much of these relics, both spiritual but also like just signs of history, these important places, were destroyed. And so there was no like physical sign that any of this had happened, even though these places were some of the most important. Victor Hugo actually campaigned to renovate a lot of historic buildings, particularly Notre-Dame Cathedral. This book is what made the Cathedral of Notre-Dame famous. He basically published this book as part of his campaign to restore ancient buildings, ancient monuments. I think in the next video I will talk about that pamphlet because I bought it when I was in Paris. I read it. It's very short. And his argument for restoring the buildings is very interesting. And I have many thoughts about it. But yeah, it's important to note that Victor Hugo basically petitioned to rebuild the cathedral, which at the time wasn't in a great condition, kind of like today. And I don't know if you can read French, but this little ticket here says that €1 is given for the restoration of Notre-Dame Cathedral. So, I mean, I guess it's appropriate since, like, this is the point of this book. But it is worth noting that Victor Hugo wanted to restore this cathedral. We haven't been introduced to the cathedral yet, but I know that sometimes it seems Hugo was concerned that books would take the place of the Paris architecture. That's definitely possible. I think that that's definitely, yeah, he wanted to have the physical, you know, he wanted to keep, there's a sense of like having the place is still there. It gives you this immersive experience. And that books can't really do that because yes, it's not enough for him to write this book. He writes this book partially to campaign for the restoration of the cathedral. And for, you know, Paris architecture. And for him, it's not really religious. It's more of a kind of part of the history of France. So Hugo himself wasn't a religious person, really, though his stories do deal with religion for sure. But he's all about restoring these buildings because of the history that they represent. Let's see. Anything else going on here? We do meet Esmeralda at the very end. And Esmeralda is like an amazing dancer, an amazing singer, and Gringoire is really dazzled by her. And he then wants to give her money, but he can't because he's really, really poor. And he's now really, really frustrated because his one time to impress the cardinals and, you know, the Flemish retinue, like he wasn't able to. So he's poor. He's kind of a nobody. And in some ways, Gringoire sort of, there's a sense that he's not willing to change with the needs of the time in a way, because I get this impression that his morality play by the end of the 16th century or the end of the 15th century, just, it's boring. Like people aren't interested in that. They don't want a morality play. They just want to make fun of everything. Like people aren't interested in watching, you know, an allegory about these four characters. I still can't figure out what these four characters are. Where are you? The morality play. Oh yeah, so here it is. You have Labor, who is married to Marchandise, which is merchandise. So marchandise isn't really merchandise. How would you translate marchandise? Marchandise is like selling the essentially the economy, like market, the market basically. So labor marries the market, and the clergy marries the nobility. And then you have other allegorical characters that are represented with different clothing. So you have the the nobility, the clergy, right? And so the nobility is dressed in, let's see. No, clergy is in silk. The market is in, I'm saying market very loosely here, wool, and Labor is in toile, which would be fabric. A robe de brocart in the figurative sense. I don't know. I don't remember. Satin. That's what it is. Satin, brocade. So satin is the ability, silk, I told you, is like the market. And toile, which is fabric, is labor. And just toiling, like the idea of toile means like web. And like, let's see if there's a better translation. Canvas. That's what it translates at. So yeah, I think that's all I have for you. What I think I will do next week, like I said, is I will talk about the pamphlet that Hugo wrote, in addition to the readings for next week. What I included is the readings for next week. So it's on the original video that I made. I'm happy to check that sometimes. Let's see. Okay, next week is so it's book 2, chapter 6 through book 3. That's what we're doing next week. So we'll do that. I will talk about the pamphlet by Victor Hugo, and I just finished reading La Farce de Maître Patelin, but I don't know if it's available in English, so I might not talk about this. But this is an example of a legal farce. This is basically something that the Bazoche would put on, as a way of kind of making fun of the justice system, and also because these are law students, kind of testing the limits of the law. I find this to be very funny. The ratings aren't like great on Goodreads, but oh well. So yeah. Let me know. I mean, if you guys are reading along and you want to comment, that would be great. So that we can have a great conversation. And I will check out the 1939 film, because I didn't know there was a 1939 film. That sounds exciting. Anything else? No? We're good for this week? Okay. Well, I hope you guys have a great week and enjoy the Hunchback of Notre-Dame. I already know I'm going to love Quasimodo because I like him in the Disney movie, so no problem. Thank you. But yeah, no, it's fun, and I really like thinking about all of the different subtexts, but also I don't know if it's always necessary. I don't ever want to make these books with all of these references. Like, I don't want to give this and this cardinal and that cardinal. I don't know them. I read the notes, some of the notes, and just it's fine. This is not a class. It's okay if you feel like you don't know enough to be able to talk about it, because I don't either. We're all just kind of learning from each other. So that's all. Go off and read Victor Hugo. Bye.